Tonight feels heavier than usual. The room is quiet, the lights are low, and yet your mind still refuses to rest. The room is quiet. You tried to distract the lights are low, and yet your mind still refuses to rest. The room is quiet to distract. Maybe by keeping yourself busy long after your body became tired. But now the night has finally caught up with you, and in the silence, everything feels louder. The thoughts, the fears, the memories you kept pushing away all day. Sometimes it happens slowly, a small feeling of unease, a weight in your chest, a strange loneliness that appears the moment the world becomes quiet, and sometimes it feels much deeper than that. There are nights when a person can feel surrounded by darkness, even inside their own home, not because the room is unsafe, but because the soul is exhausted. The Bible speaks often about nights like these, nights of fear, nights of waiting, nights when people felt abandoned, uncertain, and completely alone. A tired prophet sleeping in the wilderness, a frightened man locked inside a prison cell, a shepherd staring into the darkness, wondering if heaven had forgotten him. Again and again, Scripture returns to the same quiet truth. Human beings are rarely more vulnerable than they are at night, because nighttime removes distraction. And when distraction disappears, the heart begins to speak. That is why fear grows louder after midnight. That is why loneliness feels heavier in the dark. That is why so many people stay awake, fighting battles no one else can see. Maybe you know that feeling tonight. Maybe that is why you are here. Not only to fall asleep, but to feel safe enough to finally let go for a little while. And perhaps somewhere deep inside you are hoping that heaven still notices you. The strange thing is, many of the people God touched most deeply in Scripture were not strong when heaven found them. They were tired, discouraged, anxious, alone. Some were hiding. Some were grieving. Some believed they had already reached the end of themselves. And yet, those were often the moments when heaven came closest. Not always with noise, not always with miracles, but with presence, quiet presence. The kind that removes fear little by little. The kind that reminds a weary soul. You are not abandoned tonight, even now. While this world sleeps, the pages of Scripture describe something most people rarely think about anymore. A reality beyond what human eyes can fully see. Messengers moving silently through the darkness. Protection arriving unnoticed. Comfort appearing beside exhausted people in the middle of the night. The Bible never describes heaven as distant, the way people often imagine. Again and again, it describes a God who moves near to the fearful, near to the weary, near to those lying awake in silence. And perhaps tonight, more than you realize, you are not alone either. So before sleep slowly takes hold, before your breathing softens, before this long night finally becomes peaceful, let us walk quietly through the stories Scripture leaves behind. Stories of frightened people, stories of sleepless nights, stories of invisible protection. And perhaps, by the end of tonight, your heart may finally begin to rest too. Most people imagine angels the same way. Bright wings, soft faces, golden light pouring down from heaven. A peaceful figure floating somewhere far above the earth. But the Bible rarely describes angels the way paintings do. In Scripture, angelic encounters often begin with fear. Not comfort, not familiarity, fear. Because the people who experienced these moments understood something modern life has almost forgotten. The unseen world is not small, and heaven is not distant. Again and again, throughout the Bible, ordinary people suddenly became aware that something invisible had been near them all along. A servant standing in the wilderness, a prophet hiding inside a cave, a lonely traveler sleeping beneath the open sky. None of them expected heaven to appear beside them. Most of them were simply trying to survive another night. That is one of the strangest patterns in Scripture. Heaven often came closest during moments of exhaustion, not while people were powerful, not while they felt spiritually strong, but while they were afraid, uncertain, and emotionally worn down. There is a reason the phrase "do not be afraid" appears so often in angelic encounters, because fear is usually the first human reaction to realizing we are not as alone as we thought. Sometimes angels appeared as protectors, standing unseen between danger and the vulnerable. Sometimes they arrived as messengers, carrying words into moments of confusion and despair. And sometimes they simply remained near people who were too exhausted to continue on their own. The Bible describes angels in deserts, in prisons, in storms, in silent fields at night, not in places of comfort, but in places where human beings reached the limits of their strength. That changes the way we understand these stories, because Scripture is not trying to entertain curiosity alone. It is trying to remind frightened people that heaven has always moved quietly beside human weakness. Even now, tonight, somewhere in the world, someone is lying awake with tears in their eyes. Someone else is afraid to fall asleep because their thoughts grow too heavy in darkness. Someone feels abandoned, forgotten, unnoticed by everyone around them. And yet, the Bible repeatedly whispers the same truth across centuries. God has never been absent from the night. Sometimes, heaven moves most gently when human beings are most fragile. Not dramatically, not loudly, but silently, like breath, like peace slowly entering a restless room. There is another detail people often miss. Many biblical encounters with angels happened while people were resting, hiding, or sleeping. Jacob saw heaven while lying alone in the wilderness, with a stone beneath his head. Peter was sleeping in chains before divine help arrived. Joseph received guidance in dreams, while the world around him remained silent. Nighttime mattered in Scripture, because night strips away illusion. In darkness, people stop pretending they are in control. And perhaps that is why heaven often spoke most clearly there. Not to the proud, not to the loud, but to tired souls, finally quiet enough to listen. Maybe that is why you are here tonight too. Not simply to hear stories, but because something inside you is searching for rest, searching for reassurance, searching for the feeling that you do not have to carry every fear alone. And if Scripture teaches anything through these quiet encounters, it is this: the unseen presence of God is often closest to people who believe they have been forgotten. So tonight, as the world grows still around you, let your breathing slow, let your shoulders soften, and allow these ancient stories to gently carry the weight you have been holding for too long. Long before cities filled the earth with noise, before glowing screens followed people into the middle of the night, there were still human beings lying awake beneath darkness, carrying fear inside their hearts. The Bible remembers many of those nights, not because the nights themselves were extraordinary, but because heaven quietly entered them. One of those nights belonged to a man named Elijah. By the time he reached the wilderness, he was no longer strong. People often remember prophets as fearless men of faith, but Scripture tells a more honest story. Elijah had seen miracles. He had witnessed the power of God. And yet, after enough exhaustion, enough pressure, enough loneliness, even he broke down. He walked deep into the wilderness alone, far from crowds, far from safety, far from comfort. And eventually, he collapsed beneath a tree and prayed for everything to end. There are moments in life when exhaustion becomes so deep, a person no longer wants answers, only rest. Perhaps some people listening tonight understand that feeling more than they admit. The strange thing is, God did not approach Elijah with anger. He did not shame him for being afraid. He did not demand immediate strength. Instead, heaven responded gently. Scripture says Elijah fell asleep beneath the tree, and while he slept, an angel came near him, not with thunder, not with judgment, but quietly. The angel touched him gently and told him to rest and eat. That small detail matters more than most people realize. Because sometimes the first act of heaven is not correction. It is comfort, not pressure, not performance. Comfort. The Bible repeats this pattern often. Again and again, exhausted, people encountered the presence of God in their weakest moments. Not after becoming strong again, but before. Another night unfolded inside a prison cell. The Apostle Peter was chained between soldiers, heavy iron around his wrists, locked behind guarded doors. Humanly speaking, there was no escape. And yet, Scripture describes something remarkable. Peter was sleeping, not pacing, not panicking, sleeping. Outside the prison walls, fear ruled the city. Inside, the prison chains covered his body. But somehow, in the middle of uncertainty, sleep still found him. Then heaven entered quietly once again. A sudden light filled the cell. An angel appeared beside him. Chains fell away unnoticed. Doors opened silently. And Peter walked out into the cold night air before he fully realized what had happened. So many biblical moments happen this way. Not loudly, but almost gently. As though heaven often moves through silence more than spectacle. There was another night long before Peter, when a frightened young man named Jacob fell asleep alone beneath the open sky. He had no home beside him, no protection around him, only stones beneath his head and darkness, stretching endlessly across the land. Jacob slept there, believing he was alone. But during the night, heaven opened before him, a ladder reaching between earth and eternity, angels ascending and descending through the darkness. And when Jacob awoke, he whispered words that frightened and comforted him at the same time. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. That may be one of the deepest truths hidden inside Scripture. God is often near, long before human beings become aware of it. Long before peace arrives. Long before understanding comes. Long before fear finally loosens its grip. Even Jesus himself experienced this mystery. On the night before the crucifixion in the Garden of Gethsemane, Scripture says, his soul became overwhelmed with sorrow. The Son of God stood beneath the darkness, feeling the crushing weight of suffering approaching him. And there, in that silent garden, an angel appeared to strengthen him. Even heaven's greatest moments were touched by quiet companionship, not the removal of pain, but presence within it. That changes the way we think about weakness. Because modern life teaches people to hide exhaustion, to hide fear, to hide emotional pain. But Scripture does the opposite. The Bible repeatedly reveals heaven moving toward weary people, not away from them, toward frightened people, toward anxious people, toward lonely people, lying awake at night, wondering if anyone sees their struggle. Perhaps that is why these stories continue to comfort human beings thousands of years later, because deep down people are still searching for the same thing. Not constant success, not endless noise, but reassurance. The reassurance that even in darkness they have not been abandoned. And tonight, as your breathing grows slower, as the night becomes softer around you, perhaps these ancient stories are quietly reminding your heart of something it desperately needs to hear. You are not carrying this night alone. There is something different about fear after dark. The very same thoughts that seem manageable during the day somehow become heavier at night. A small worry grows larger. A distant memory suddenly feels close again. And silence begins to magnify everything the human heart has tried to ignore. Perhaps that is why so many people struggle most when the world finally becomes quiet.